My father told me you wanted a wife. 6 words at a gate before sunrise, and they would change his life forever. Stay close, because what that Apache woman carried in a folded letter was a dead man's last promise, and it was about to rebuild everything grief had taken from Jesse Marsh. His name was Jesse Marsh, a solitary rancher out on the New Mexico Territory frontier, 1885. A man who had spent 3 years learning how to want nothing. And the woman standing at his gate in the dark was Doli, daughter of Neil Tallbear, the man the white men along the cattle routes had known as Sam. Sam had been dead 3 months, and apparently, before he went, he had sent his daughter riding through the night to the one man he trusted most in this world. Jesse had no idea what was coming. He had no idea that a dead man's last promise would walk through his gate carrying a leather satchel and a look in her eyes that made one thing perfectly clear. She was nobody's charity case and nobody's burden. If you want to know how a life gets rebuilt by the most unexpected set of hands, stay with this one all the way through. Watch till the end, and if this ride moves you, hit like and subscribe. It keeps these stories coming. Now let's go back to where it started. Before sunrise, at a gate Jesse Marsh had not yet opened. Jesse Marsh had come to the New Mexico Territory in the spring of 1876 with a wagon, a wife, and the particular quiet confidence of a man who has found the right piece of ground. The land he settled was south of the Mira Blanca Valley, a dry stretch of grassland against a red mesa with a reliable creek running along the east pasture. Not easy land, but honest. The kind of land that gave back in proportion to what you put in. He and Margaret had worked it together for 4 years, building the fences one section at a time and the house room by room as money allowed. They had planned more. Children, dogs, the noise of a full house. Margaret had talked about that the way some people talk about whether they know is coming, not if but when. She had been sure of it. Then came the winter of 1882, and the fever that swept through the valley, and 9 days was all it took. 9 days from the first cough to the morning Jesse woke to a silence so absolute it had weight. He had buried her on the rise east of the house where she used to sit in the evenings and watch the light leave the mesa. After that he kept the ranch because he did not know what else to keep. He worked from before dawn until full dark, and he let the house get quiet, and after a while the quiet became the shape of his days, and he stopped noticing it was missing anything. He had a hand named Pete Dorado who came Tuesdays and Thursdays to help with the heavy work, and a neighbor 3 miles south named Holt, who bought his calves at fair price, and the woman at the Mira Blanca Mercantile who set aside his flour order without him having to ask. These were the connections that held. Everything else had narrowed. He did not think of himself as lonely. He thought of himself as simplified. The morning of the 23rd of March, 1885, was still black when Jesse heard the knock. He had been up already. He was always up before first light, a habit he had kept because sleep had never come easy since the winter of '82. And getting moving was the only remedy he had found for the space between 3 in the morning and dawn. He was filling the water buckets from the barrel near the kitchen door when the knock reached him. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Certain, not frantic, not timid, just clear. The knock of someone who had decided to come here and had not let the dark talk them out of it. Jesse set the bucket down and stood still and listened. 1 horse, standing quiet, no other sounds. No riders grouping up the way men do when they plan trouble. He took the rifle from its place beside the door and walked out. The gate at the edge of his yard stood in the gray-black dark, and on the other side of it was a horse he did not recognize, and a young woman sitting it with a kind of stillness that was not timid, but deliberate. She held the reins loose. She was not running from anything, or at least she did not want him to think so. Jesse stopped 6 feet from the gate and looked at her. She looked back. In the thin blue light before sunrise, he could see she was Apache, young, 20 or so, maybe a few years more. She wore a buckskin dress and her dark hair was loose on her shoulders. A leather satchel rested across her hip. She sat the horse like she had been born on one. "Who are you?" "My name is Doli." Her English was precise, a little careful, but she chose her words without hesitation. "My father was Neil Tallbear. White men called him Sam." Jesse's grip on the rifle went slack. Sam. The name came down on him like a stone dropped from a height. Sam Tallbear, or Neil as his people knew him, was the man Jesse had driven cattle with for 3 seasons back in the late 70s. They had pushed longhorns north through hard country 2 years running, then hauled a freight supply wagon through the Tornado del Muerto on a third, and in all that time they had built the kind of trust that does not require many words. The kind of trust that gets established through 100 small decisions, whether a man shares his water when water is short, whether he pulls his share of the night watch without being pushed, whether he gives you the true thing when the easy thing would cost him nothing. Sam had ridden out of Jesse's life 6 years ago, when his band had moved south following the grazing. They had shaken hands at a road junction in the dark at the end of the last drive, and Jesse had figured the silence since then meant the distance was simply too great for letters. He had not considered the other possibility. Sam's dead? 3 months. The words came out even and flat, the way they do after you have had to repeat them enough times that the carrying of them has become its own muscle. He asked me to come here. She reached into the satchel and pulled out an envelope. She held it out over the gate. Her arm was steady. Jesse came forward and took it. He looked at the envelope in his hands. Sam's name was not on it. His own was. Jesse Marsh, in handwriting he recognized, though he had not seen it in years. He looked back up at Doli. She sat the horse and waited. She had ridden through the night to get here, and she did not ask to be thanked for it. Come in. He unlatched the gate. He tied her horse at the post near the water trough and led her inside. He lit the lamp on the kitchen table and pulled out the chair across from his own and gestured at it. She sat but kept the satchel on her lap, and she did not relax her back against the chair. She watched him the way people watch a person they are not yet sure of. Jesse broke the wax seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Sam's handwriting leaned across the page, slower than Jesse remembered it, with some letters pressed harder than others the way a man writes when his strength is going. Jesse, he read, if Doli is sitting across from you right now, then I am gone and she got through safe and you did not turn her away at the gate. I knew you wouldn't. That is one of the 2 reasons I sent her to you. The first reason is this. 10 years ago in the tornado you were sick with the fever that was killing men from El Paso to Santa Fe. Do you remember the night you thought you were dying? 3 nights in, your biggest regret, you kept saying, was that you had never built anything that would stay after you were gone. No one to carry the work forward. You made me promise to get word to your family if you didn't make it through. I got you through instead, but I never forgot those words. You did make it through. I did not collect on that particular promise, but I am collecting now in a different way. Doli is 22 years old. She is the best thing I ever made in this life, and her mother died 4 years ago, and now I am going too, and she has no one here to stand for her. I cannot send her to live with my sister's family because her husband died last fall, and there is barely enough. I cannot leave her here with the band because there is a man, a trader named Harlan Gault, who has been pestering her since last winter, and with me gone there will be nothing to stop him from making his move. Gault is the kind of man who does not ask. He arranges things, and there is nothing to be done about them after. Doli needs a roof and a name behind her, until she can stand on her own ground. She is strong, and she is proud, and she is better with a horse and a rifle than you are, Jesse, and you know it. She will not be a burden. She will work the ranch as hard as you do. All I am asking is that you give her somewhere safe to land. The second reason is one I trust you to figure out in your own time. Your old partner, Neil. Jesse read the letter twice. He set it on the table. Across from him, Doli sat with her hands folded on the satchel and watched his face. He told you what's in it. Enough. She paused. Enough to know you were a decent man. Enough to know you would likely stand there looking like you had swallowed a fence post for a few minutes, and then do the right thing anyway. Jesse almost smiled. That did sound like Sam. He looked at the letter again, then at Doli, then at the lamp flame between them. Outside, the sky was starting to gray up. There's a back room. Cots in there. Supper's at sundown, and I don't hold it for late arrivals. Doli nodded once, as though she had expected nothing more and wanted nothing more. She picked up her satchel and stood. She had been riding since before midnight, and she walked like she was not tired, which Jesse understood was a decision she had made rather than the truth. At the doorway, she stopped. In the morning, I'll look at your north fence. Your third post from the gate is leaning. I noticed. Then you'll want it fixed before it goes down." She went to the back room. Jesse sat at the table for a long time with the lamp burning and Sam's letter in his hands. Harlan Gault. He rolled the name around and did not like the shape of it. The first week was careful and quiet on both sides. Doli rose before Jesse did, which was not easy to do, and by the time he came out of the bedroom, she had the stove going and the water on and had usually already been outside to look at whatever wanted looking at. The third fence post was straight by the second morning. She had dug it out and reset it herself, tamping the dirt down with a fence bar, and Jesse found it standing plumb when he came to do the morning water. He said nothing about it at breakfast, but she caught him looking. It wasn't difficult. The hole just needed another 6 inches. "I know how to set a fence post. Then you know it takes an hour, not 2 weeks. Jesse put his hat on and went to work. They exchanged information at meals, not conversation. She would tell him what she had found that wanted fixing. He would tell her what the day's work needed. Brief, functional, without warmth, but without cold either, which Jesse recognized as something. It was how you talked with someone you were watching carefully before deciding anything. On the fourth day, he came in at noon to find the kitchen smelling different. She had made a stew with the dried venison from the larder, and something else he could not place, an herb of some kind, earthy and slightly bitter, that came together with the meat in a way his own cooking never had. He ate 2 bowls without comment. She ate 1 and watched him from the other side of the table. "What is that herb?" She glanced at her bowl. "We call it huajillo. My mother grew it." A pause. "I found some along your creek bank. I brought seeds." Jesse nodded. He didn't ask anything else, and she didn't offer anything else. But that evening, when he passed the creek on his way to check the cattle, he noticed a small cleared patch of dirt near the bank where she had been working. The ground was turned and soft and laid out with the particular care of someone who had done this before. The 6th day brought a different test. Jesse came back from the east pasture at mid-afternoon to find Doli in the barn working on the harness he had been putting off for 3 weeks. The stitching had gone bad on the collar piece, a job that required an awl and a particular kind of patience with leather that did not want to cooperate. She had it half done already. Jesse leaned against the barn door and watched her work. Her hands moved with confidence through the leather, the awl going in clean and straight, the thread following without bunching. "Where did you learn to do harness work?" "My father kept 4 horses. She didn't look up. 2 of them were difficult. Difficult horses destroy harness faster than easy ones. She pulled a stitch tight. My father's rule: if you ride them, you maintain what they break. Jesse looked at the piece in her hands. "That's a better stitch than I make." She glanced up at him briefly. "You hold the awl too far from the end. It gives you less control. You get a wider angle and the stitch loosens in the leather after 2 months." He watched her finish the collar piece and start on the check rein. He went back to what he had been doing, but the awl correction stayed with him all afternoon, and that evening he tried it her way, and she was right. The 8th day brought rain, a slow gray rain that turned the yard to mud and kept them both indoors for most of the afternoon. Jesse sat at the kitchen table and worked through his account ledger and tried not to be aware of her presence in the back room. He could hear her moving. Small sounds, the scrape of something on wood, a pause, the scrape again. After an hour of it, he got up and looked through the doorway. She was sitting cross-legged on the cot with a piece of charcoal and a flat piece of board across her knees, drawing. She was drawing the view out the small window of the back room, which was just the gray curtain of rain and the blurred shape of the barn, and beyond it, the black line of the distant mesa. She had captured it in a few dozen marks and have looked more like that window's view than the window itself did. She looked up when she heard him in the doorway. Something shifted in her face. Quick, a flash of something almost like embarrassment before it closed over again. "I didn't mean to leave the charcoal on your work table. It was in the barn. I'll put it back. I don't use it. Draw what you want to draw." He went back to the ledger, but he thought about that drawing for the rest of the afternoon. He had not expected that. He was not sure what he had expected, but not that. 10 days in, he asked her about Sam. They were outside, side by side, replacing the leather joint on the pump handle, and the work was slow enough that talking was natural. How long was he sick? Her eyes stayed on the fitting she was threading. Most of a year he didn't admit how bad until the last few months. She paused. He was stubborn about that. That sounds right. He talked about you, more than he talked about most people. Jesse did not say anything for a moment. What did he say? That you were the only white man he ever trusted to do what he claimed he was going to do. She pulled the fitting tight. Also that you talked too little and worked too much and needed someone to make you sit down every now and then. Jesse made a sound that might have been a laugh, very quiet. He was right about that. She looked at him sideways. He usually was. Most of the time, he was wrong once about a river crossing in the dark. What happened? Lost 3 steers and a good rope. Doli's mouth curved slightly. She pulled another fitting. He mentioned that crossing to me. Claimed it was your idea. He did not. He absolutely did. Jessie held the pump handle steady while she worked the fitting in, and did not say anything, but the silence had changed shape. The day she taught him the word for hawk was a Thursday in early April. They were standing at the east fence watching a redtail work the thermals above the pasture, and Doli let out a low breath of words that were not English. Jessie looked at her. What was that? Ki-he. It means hawk. She paused. We have different words for different kinds. That one, the red tail, we call it the one who sees the small things, because it can spot a mouse in tall grass from 200 feet up. Is that a name or a description? In our language, they are often the same thing. She watched it circle. My father used to say a hawk never worries about yesterday's mouse, only the one in the grass right now. Jessie thought about that. Sam always did have a way of making a simple thing sound bigger than it was. The same went for you, he always thought. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the hawk, and there was something in her face that was neither a smile nor not one. He looked back at the bird. The hawk rode the air above them and eventually banked south and was gone. They stood there in silence for a while, not the guarded silence of the first days, but something quieter. That same evening, after supper, Doli went outside to the east side of the house, to the rise where the last of the day's light catches the mesa, and sat down in the grass and was still. Jesse watched from the kitchen window for a moment, then went out himself and stood a few feet behind her. She did not turn around. My mother used to say the evening is when the day talks back to you. You have to be quiet enough to hear it. Jessie sat down a few feet to her left. The mesa was going to red gold in the last of the sun, and the sky above it was pale green fading to dark blue in the east. Do you miss her? Every day. Doli looked at the mesa, but not in the same way I used to. It used to hurt like something torn. Now it just feels like something that is always there. She paused. Like a scar you've had long enough that you forget about it until you press on it. Jesse was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about Margaret. That sounds right. Who did you lose? Not a prying question, a plain one. My wife, 3 years ago. I'm sorry. She would have liked this view. She used to sit up here in the evenings. Neither of them spoke after that for a while. The light went off the mesa, and the first stars came out above the far ridge, and the air cooled down fast the way New Mexico air does in the early spring. After a time, Doli looked at the first stars. My father knew you had lost someone. He said it was the second reason he trusted you. Jessie looked at her. What do you mean? Grief either makes a man hard, or it makes him careful. She looked at the stars coming in. He thought you were the second kind. Jessie sat with that. He did not know how to respond to it, and he did not try. They went back inside when the dark came all the way down, and Jessie put the kettle on for coffee, and Doli got her board and charcoal and drew the mesa in the last light from memory at the kitchen table while he worked through his accounts. Neither spoke. The quiet was different from the quiet of the first days. It had room in it. In the second week of April, Jessie drove to the town of Mira Blanca for supplies. He was not inside the feed store 5 minutes before old Frank Poole found him in the grain aisle. Heard you've got an Apache woman out at the Marsh place. Poole used the tone people use when they want to make a question sound like a statement. Helping out. Jessie put a 50-pound sack of oats on his shoulder and moved toward the counter. Poole followed him. Harlan Gault was asking about that. Jessie set the sack down on the counter and turned around. Harlan Gault? Same. Poole rubbed the back of his neck. He's been asking around about a woman belonging to the Tallbear family. Says there's a debt of her father's. I don't know the particulars. Jesse paid for his supplies and drove home faster than he needed to. Doli was mending a bridle on the front step when he pulled in. She looked at his face when he climbed down from the wagon, and she knew something had shifted. What happened? He laid it out for her, Poole's warning. What Gault was claiming about a debt of her father's. She set the bridle down in her lap and was still for a moment. Then she looked up. He's lying. I figured. There was no debt. Her hands tightened on the bridle leather. Gault came last winter wanting to buy 3 horses. My father refused. So Gault came back with 2 men and announced the horses were already his, and that my father owed for grazing on land east of the trading post. Land my father had worked for 20 years, before the trading post even existed. And now your father is gone, and now my father is gone. She picked up the bridle again and went back to the mending, but her hands were not steady the way they usually were. He won't come here looking to collect a made-up debt from me. You don't know Gault, no. But he doesn't know me. Jesse went into the house. He read Sam's letter again at the kitchen table. He had read it many times now, but each time he got to the second reason, the one Sam trusted him to figure out in his own time. He read it more slowly. He looked up from the page. Through the kitchen window he could see Doli on the front step, bent over the bridle, the afternoon light on her dark hair and the set of her shoulders carrying something she did not ask anyone else to carry. Jesse put the letter down. He thought about Margaret. He thought about her the way he always did, with a kind of steady grief that had become part of him, the way a healed wound becomes part of the arm. She had died in the winter of '82, a fever the doctor in Mirablanca could not get ahead of, and she had been married 4 years. He still talked to her sometimes, not out loud, but in the space between one thought and the next. He had not expected to feel anything new about anything. He had not been looking for it, but Doli had been here 3 weeks, and the house sounded different. Not better, not worse, just different. Inhabited, like there was a second heartbeat in the walls. He had started listening for her footsteps when he woke in the morning. He had started expecting another voice at the breakfast table. These were not things he had planned on. He pushed back from the table and went to the front step and sat down beside her. She did not look up from the bridle, but she shifted slightly to make room for him. For a while they were both quiet. My father told you about Gault. Her needle kept moving. He warned me, get to Jesse Marsh before Gault hears. Those were his words. A pause. I didn't know if I could make it in time. You did. A short exhale through her nose that was almost a laugh. I rode that horse very fast for a very long time. Was he scared when he sent you? Doli looked at her hands. My father was not a man who showed fear the way other men do. But yes, she smoothed her thumb along a stitch. He was scared for me. He didn't put it that way. What he said was, go to Jesse Marsh, go tonight, show him the letter. And then he gripped my arm and held on a little too long. A pause. That was the scared part. Jesse sat with that for a moment. He was a good man. He was the best man I knew. She looked out at the yard, which is why I trusted his judgment in sending me here. 2 days after that, Jesse came in from the north pasture at dusk to find Doli in the yard with a rifle she had taken from the back room, working through a set of practice shots at a row of tin cans she had placed on the fence rail. She was not bad. She was more than not bad. He watched her reload with her hands moving easy and deliberate, and put 3 or 4 cans down in a row. Sam teach you that? She lowered the rifle. My mother's brother. His rule was this: a woman who can't defend herself depends on the goodwill of everyone around her, and goodwill runs out. What happened to him? He went to Arizona 5 years ago. We lost contact. She handed Jesse the rifle in a way that was not casual, that was deliberate, a gesture of basic trust. You should know I don't intend to be taken somewhere I don't choose to go. Jesse checked the load and looked at her. I didn't figure you did. I want you to know it out loud, in case Gault comes here thinking I'm something to be collected. He'll find out different. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up the tin cans from the ground and set them back on the rail. Shoot with me. I want to see if you're any good. He turned out to be better than she was at distance, and worse than she was at quick work, and she pointed this out in exactly those terms. They shot until the light went completely and went in to supper, and Jesse thought it was the most comfortable he had felt in that yard since before the winter of '82. There was a morning in the middle of April when Jesse woke to find the breakfast table already set and Doli gone. Her horse was still in the barn. He stood in the yard and looked around until he spotted her, far out on the east pasture, walking slow along the fence line with her head bent forward and her hands behind her back. He had seen that walk before, the walk of someone thinking through something they do not yet have words for. He did not go after her. He started on the morning work. She came back when the sun was fully up, sat down at the table, poured herself coffee. Her eyes were a little red, which she did not acknowledge, and he did not mention. He would have been 54 next month. Jesse sat down across from her. He knew she meant Sam. He talked about living to 80. Too many things still to see, he always claimed. He told me the same. She looked at her cup. He also had a notion that the things he most wanted to see were the ones he couldn't plan for. She glanced up. I think he meant this, whatever this ends up being. Jesse held that. He thought about Sam at 53, sick and planning anyway, sending his daughter on a night ride to a man he had not seen in 6 years, still moving forward even while the ground was going out from under him. I think you're right. Doli nodded once. She drank her coffee. After a while, he would have liked this coffee. Jesse said it was his mother's recipe, nothing special. Doli gave it better odds than she'd expected from a man who made undrinkable coffee. Jesse pointed out she was drinking the first pot of the day, which was not representative. Something in the air between them lightened the way it does when two people have gotten through something together. The barn ladder incident came at the end of the 3rd week. Jesse was up in the loft pulling down hay, and the top rung let go. Old wood he had meant to replace it 6 months ago and kept putting it off. He caught the side rail going down, and it slowed him, but not enough, and he hit the barn floor hard enough to knock the air out, and for a moment the ceiling was moving in circles above him. He was still on his back, trying to remember how breathing worked when Doli came through the barn door at a fast walk. She must have heard it from the yard. She crouched beside him and looked at his face. How many fingers? She held up her hand. 4. How many now? Still 4. You didn't change anything. She made a short sound. She pressed 2 fingers against his wrist, counting. She ran her hands along his arms from shoulder to wrist. Move your feet. He did. She nodded. Nothing broken. Probably. She looked up at the loft. That ladder wanted replacing. I know that. Then it should have been replaced. She stood and offered her hand. He took it and she pulled, and he got up slower than he would have liked, his back already making itself known. Thank you. She was looking at the broken rung on the ground. I'll get the wood from the stack. You sit down for 10 minutes. He started to say he was fine. She gave him a look. He went and sat on the hay bale near the door. She replaced the rung herself, cut and fitted and pegged, while he sat and watched and gradually felt his back stop its objections. She worked without asking him anything, without narrating what she was doing, just working the way she always worked, thorough and quiet. When she was done, she tested each rung with her weight before she'd call it finished. My father had a saying. She climbed down. A thing mended right is better than a thing that never broke, because you know where it's strong, because you paid attention to it. She set the fence bar aside. Strength without attention is just luck. Jesse thought about that for a while after she had gone back to the house. He thought it applied to more than ladders. They fell into a habit in the evenings that neither of them named or decided on. After supper, one of them would go outside, and the other would follow, and they would sit on the step or in the yard or sometimes up on the east rise where the light left the mesa last. They did not always talk. Sometimes Jesse would work on mending harness, and Doli would draw and the dark would come down around them, and they would go inside when it got cold. Sometimes they talked about Sam. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, what it needed, what it had. Occasionally, they talked about things with no practical bearing on anything at all. The best way to read a storm coming in from the north, whether certain horses had opinions about people, what the mesa had looked like before the white settlements came. One evening, Doli put a question to him. What would he have done with the ranch if things had gone differently? If Margaret had lived? If the years had gone the way they were supposed to go, Jesse was quiet for a while. Built more of it. There's water on the south side I've never run pipe to. Good grazing if you put the fence right. You still could. I know. She looked at the south pasture in the dark. We could. Jesse did not say anything for a moment. He turned the harness strap over in his hands. The words settled into the air between them, small and plain and the size of something much larger. Yes, we could. The first time Jesse noticed the drawings was on a rainy afternoon in the third week. He had come in for a dry coat and found her satchel open on the kitchen table. He had not meant to look, but his hand stopped moving. Sheets of paper covered the table, horses running through canyon dust, the hawk circling high over red cliffs, the mesa at evening, one careful sketch of an old man's hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Sam's hands, unmistakably the knuckles and the way the fingers curved. Jesse picked it up. He stood holding it longer than he intended. You weren't supposed to see those. Doli stood in the doorway. There was no panic in her voice, only quiet acknowledgement. You drew these? My father taught me. She stepped closer. He believed that if you learn to draw something, you learn to really see it. Jesse set the sheet back down carefully. There was another one under it. The ranch, the crooked barn, the repaired fence, the bent cottonwood beside the well. She had drawn every line exactly as it stood. You've been drawing this place. I draw what I live with. She picked up the stack and straightened it. I drew my father's camp every winter. I drew the river by my grandmother's house. I drew our horses. She looked at the paper in her hands. Drawing is how I stay somewhere, even when I'm not sure I'm staying. Jesse looked at her. It came out plainly, without self-pity, just a fact about how she was built. You're staying. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked back at him. That's not up to you. I know, but you're welcome to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she put the papers back in her satchel. Supper should be ready. She went to the stove. 3 days later she handed him a folded sheet without comment. He unfolded it. The well at the center, morning light on the water coming off the bucket, and his own hands on the rope, every weathered line captured from memory. Near the water's reflection, under careful shading, 2 small figures stood side by side. He held the paper. A long moment passed without a word. Thank you. She was already back to her mending. You use your hands differently than most men. You don't hold things tighter than they need to be held. Jesse was quiet. He went to put the drawing on the shelf and thought that was probably the closest to a compliment she was likely to offer, and that it was enough. Gault arrived on a Wednesday morning with 3 men. 2 of them had the look of hired hands who had found an easier income than ranch work. The third was a town deputy named Crabbe, who Jesse recognized from Mira Blanca, a man who seemed to turn up wherever Gault pointed him. Jesse was in the barn when he heard the horses come through the gate. He came out into the yard and found Doli already standing between the house and the well, watching them come. She had a rifle in her hands, held down at her side, and she had not been running. Gault was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s who wore his clothes like they cost more than they did. He pulled up in the yard and looked from Jesse to Doli and seemed to decide something. Marsh. I'm here about the woman. She has a name. Gault looked at Doli. The tall, bare girl has a standing obligation to me. Her father signed an agreement. Show me the agreement. Gault's mouth pulled at one corner. It's not the kind that gets written down. Then it doesn't exist. The county sees it differently. He gestured at Crabbe. The deputy pulled a folded paper from his coat. Jesse walked forward and took it. He read it. It claimed an unpaid note of $40 against the estate of Neal Tallbear, collectible against his heir. Sam didn't have an estate. He had horses and gear. I expect those are gone already. His heir, then. Gault's eyes went back to Doli. Jesse folded the paper and held it back out to Crabbe. Crabbe didn't take it. Jesse let it fall to the ground. She's not going with you. One of the hired men put a hand on his hip near his gun. Jesse did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Gault. You're putting yourself crosswise of a legal order. I'm putting myself crosswise of a piece of paper you wrote yourself. There's a difference. Gault's jaw tightened. He looked past Jesse at Doli. This isn't finished. It is for today. Next time you come through that gate without being invited, I'll treat it accordingly." Gault looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the rifle in Doli's hands. He looked at Jesse's face, which Jesse made as empty as possible. Then Gault turned his horse and rode out. The three men went with him. Crabbe gave Jesse a look on his way past that was both apologetic and helpless. Doli stood watching them go until the dust settled. Then she looked at Jesse. "He'll be back, I know, with more men. Probably." She looked at the gate. "I don't want you in danger on my account." Jesse picked up Gault's paper from the ground and folded it and put it in his coat pocket. "I'll need this, for the county clerk. You're not afraid of him." "I didn't say that." He looked at her. "But afraid doesn't change what needs doing." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, and he could see her working to keep her expression neutral, and not fully succeeding. That evening, Jesse sat at the kitchen table with Sam's letter and a piece of paper and pen beside it. He was working out what to do. He had a sense that a formal employment record at the county clerk's office would hold Gault off for a while, but not forever. Gault was the kind of man who found angles. He would find one. There was another option. Jesse had known it since he first read the letter. Since he got to the second reason Sam had trusted him to figure out. He had been carefully not thinking about it for 3 weeks. He put the pen down. He looked at the wall. He could hear Doli in the back room, the soft sound of her charcoal moving on board. She drew every evening now. She had stopped apologizing for it after he corrected her the third time. She didn't need to. He thought about Sam, who had driven cattle beside him through rain and dust and hard miles and never once wanted anything except honesty and a fair split, and who at the end of his life had sent his daughter riding through the night to a man he trusted because he had nowhere else to put her. He thought about what Sam had written. "The second reason is one I trust you to figure out in your own time." Jesse picked the pen back up. He rode to Mirablanca the next morning, and again the morning after that. He talked to the county clerk. He talked to a man named Elias Fitch, who was a lawyer and who owed Jesse a favor from a land dispute 3 years back. He also talked to Doli. That conversation happened 2 evenings later in the kitchen after supper, with the lamp between them and neither of them pretending to be busy with anything else. He walked her through everything he had done in Mirablanca, the county clerk, Fitch, what each of them had turned up. Then he laid out what he was thinking. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that Jesse started to think he had read the whole situation wrong and felt the particular hollow feeling of a man who has misjudged. Then her hands wrapped around her coffee cup and she looked at them. "My father trusted you with this. I know. That is not a small thing." She turned the cup in her hands. "I don't want to be anyone's obligation." "You're not." He had thought about how to say this for 6 days, and in the end what he had were plain words with no decoration. "You've been here a month. You fixed the north fence and the pump handle and the barn roof and the harness collar and that thing with the well rope I'd been ignoring for a year. You made that stew with the herb from the creek, and I have thought about that stew 3 times a week ever since." He paused. "That drawing is on my shelf. You taught me the word for hawk. You shot 3 or 4 cans off the rail in the dark and made me feel bad about my quick work." He looked at her. "This isn't obligation. I'm asking because I would ask regardless of Gault." She looked at her cup. She was working through something, and he let her work through it. "My father had a belief that grief either makes a man hard or it makes him careful. You told me. He also believed careful men make good husbands." She looked up. He let that one slip once, last fall. He wasn't looking at me when he said it. He was staring at nothing, the way he did when he was thinking out loud more than talking. I didn't know then that he was already planning this. Jesse sat with that. Sam was usually thinking further ahead than anyone around him. "Yes." She was quiet for another moment. "I want to think about it tonight." That was fair. He went to bed and did not sleep particularly well. In the morning, before the sun was up, she found him at the water trough in the dark and stood beside him in the cold air. "My answer is yes." Her voice was quiet and certain, and she looked at him and did not look away. Jesse stood with the water bucket in his hands and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 3 years. Good. It came out rough. Don't make it strange. He almost laughed. He didn't. He set the bucket down, and they stood in the cold dark for a moment, and then she went back to the house to start the stove, and Jessie stood there alone for another minute, thinking about Sam, who had known, who had always been thinking further ahead. Gault came back on a Saturday 6 days later. This time he had 6 men. 4 of them were hired guns, clearly by the way they spread out coming through the gate. Crabb was not with them this time. Jessie was ready. Elias Fitch was there, standing in the yard with his satchel and 2 decades of land law practice and the look of a man who finds Harlan Gault's professionally interesting. When Gault pulled up and saw the arrangement in front of him, his eyes went to Fitch and stayed there. Harlan Gault. Fitch's voice was pleasant. "I have a statement from the county clerk's office attesting that the late Niall Tallbear carried no outstanding obligations at the time of his death, and that no lien exists against any member of his family." He held up a second paper. "I also have a certified record of formal employment establishing that Miss Doli Tallbear has been in the lawful service of the Marsh ranch since the 23rd of March of this year." A tilt of his head. "And one more document filed this past Thursday, which I imagine will be of particular interest." Gault's jaw had gone tight. "What document?" Fitch looked at Jessie. Jessie looked at Doli. She gave a small nod. "Marriage record, filed in Mira Blanca Thursday afternoon." Gault stared at him. "She is my wife. And you are on my land without an invitation. I'd like you to leave." The 6 hired guns looked at Gault. Gault looked at Fitch and his papers, and at Jessie and at Doli, and at the rifle each of them held, and at the clear fact that Fitch would be writing down everything that happened here. Gault turned his horse. He did not say anything. The 6 men followed him out through the gate and down the road. Fitch put his papers in his satchel. He shook Jessie's hand and Doli's hand. His professional opinion was that this would be the last of that particular problem, and rode for Mira Blanca. Jessie and Doli stood in the yard in the quiet that came after. The late morning sun was up properly, and the yard was warm. Doli set her rifle against the gatepost and looked at the empty road where Gault had been. Jessie watched her profile, the line of her jaw, the stillness she wore like clothing. She had held it all morning, through Gault's arrival and his men spreading out in the yard. And the moment when Jessie had said the word marriage out loud, she had held steady through all of it without a crack in her composure. Now that composure was doing something different. She let out a slow breath. Her shoulders dropped the smallest amount. It was the same as watching a person set down a weight they had been carrying for so long they had stopped knowing they were carrying it. Jessie stayed quiet. He let her have the moment. After a while she turned. "You filed the record before I gave you my answer." Jessie looked sideways at her. "I filed an intent. It needed your signature to be final." A pause. "You could have said no." She was quiet for a moment. "Could I?" "Of course. What would you have done then?" Jessie thought about it. Probably the same thing, only slower and with more lawyers. She turned her head and looked at him, and there was something in her face that was not a smile yet, but was thinking about becoming one. "You are stubborn. Sam warned you." "He did." She looked back at the gate. "He also said your stubbornness was mostly pointed in the right direction." Jessie set his rifle butt on the ground. He stood beside her in the sun and thought about Sam driving cattle through the dark with him years back, talking about the lights above them being campfires left by the people who had gone ahead. He thought about all the things a person carries, all the weight of it, and how sometimes a weight you thought was yours alone turns out to be one someone else has been carrying from the other side. "Inside. I'll make coffee. I'll make coffee." She pushed off the gatepost. "You'll make something undrinkable." This was fair, and he knew it. He went inside. There was a proper ceremony in Mira Blanca in May, small and quick, with the county judge and 2 witnesses. Mrs. Galvin from the Mercantile cried quietly and tried not to be seen doing it. Afterward she pressed Dolly's hands between her own. "You take care of that difficult man," and Doli nodded that she intended to. They drove back to the ranch in the afternoon light. The cake from the bakery sat on the kitchen table for 3 days before either of them remembered it was there. They ate it for breakfast on a Sunday morning with coffee, which was not how cake was meant to be eaten, and Doli decided it was an acceptable use of a Sunday. Jessie agreed. The changes at the ranch were slow and plain and did not announce themselves. The herb garden along the creek bank grew in, and Doli tended it in the early mornings, and the kitchen began to smell different on cooking days. She planted other things too, working from seeds she had brought and from cuttings she gathered along the creek. And by June there was a corner of the east yard that was hers in a way that Jessie left alone and never crossed without her being there. She drew constantly. She drew the ranch in every season of light, dawn and noon and the blue hour after sunset. Jessie came to understand that this was how she paid attention to the world, the way some people use words. She never tried to explain it to him, and he never needed her to. He just looked at what appeared on the shelf and the walls, and thought about it quietly. She gave him drawings without ceremony, one of the well at sunrise, one of the two horses side by side at the water trough, their heads bent close together in the way horses have when they have worked out some kind of understanding, one of Jessie's coat hanging on the peg by the door, and it was strange how clearly she had captured the particular way it hung, the weight of it, the lived-in shape. He put them all on the kitchen shelf and did not say much about any of them, and she did not push him to. One evening he got curious about what she drew when she was not on the ranch, when she was out on the pasture alone, or in town. She thought about it. People's hands. I've always drawn hands. You can tell more from hands than from faces. Faces people manage, hands they forget about. What do mine say? She looked at them across the table. That you've worked hard your whole life, that you hold things carefully when you think they might break. She looked back at her own cup, that you're not as finished as you thought you were. Jessie sat with that for a moment. He looked at his hands, the same hands he'd had for 40 years, and saw them slightly differently than he had before. Your father's hands, the drawing you had, did you carry that all the way here? In the satchel. She touched it. I carry it everywhere. Jessie nodded. He did not say anything else about it. But that night, lying in the dark, he thought about a 22-year-old woman riding through the night with her father's drawing in a satchel and a letter in an envelope, and the address of a man she had never met. And he thought about what it took to do that, to ride toward a stranger's gate in the dark on nothing but a dead man's word that the stranger was good. She taught him more Apache words as the weeks went on. He learned the word for rain, which was different depending on whether the rain was welcome or not. He learned the word for home, which was not a place but a feeling. He learned the color the sky goes just before a storm, which Doli insisted had no English equivalent. Jessie practiced the word until she judged it close enough that he could use it. He taught her the particular name he had for the north pasture, a name that had nothing to do with compass direction and everything to do with a day 30 years ago when his father had found a horse standing in the rain there. She found this an acceptable reason for a name. Her father had done the same, named places for what had happened in them. Most places worth anything carry two names, she thought, the one on the map and the one that means something. Jessie thought about that often. He thought about it when he was working and when he was not working, and several times when he woke in the gray dark of early morning and lay listening to the ranch settle around him. The new sounds of it, the two heartbeat sound of it. One morning in late June, she was at the stove with the creek herbs going in the pan, and without looking up, she spoke toward the pan. Things that go together belong together. She was talking about the hawk and the mouse, finishing something she had started weeks ago. But Jessie stood in the doorway and thought about Sam, who had known before Jessie did what the second reason was, who had looked ahead the way he always did, patient and certain, and seen something Jessie could not yet see from where he was standing. Your father was a wise man. He was. She set the spoon down. He was also very smug about it. Jessie smiled. He went and sat at the kitchen table. She put a bowl in front of him. Outside the window the evening was coming on, gold over the mesa, and the horse in the barn made the long, easy sound of settling in for the night. Jessie looked at the bowl and at Doli and at the kitchen that had become something different from what it used to be. 2 cups on the shelf instead of 1, her satchel by the door. The smell of the herbs, the drawing of the old oak tree on the wall that he had stopped seeing until she drew it, and now could not stop seeing. Thank you, she sat across from him. For what? The stew, the fence post, all of it. She looked at her bowl. Thank you for opening the gate. They ate. Outside, the dark came down easy and the stars came out, and wherever Sam Tallbear had gone he had done what he always did. He had looked ahead and seen what was there, and trusted Jessie to meet it. The debt, if there had ever been one, was settled. But by then it was not a debt anymore. It was just a life, and it was full. If this story rode with you tonight, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories on this trail, and we'd like to keep riding with you.